podcast listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Renoites. My name is Conor McQuivey. I am your host. Thank you for joining me today. Today's guest on the podcast is my mom, Michele McQuivey. We just had Mother's Day a couple days ago, and my wonderful mother was willing to come on the podcast and talk about being a mom, raising a family, her exciting and interesting life. This was such a fun episode, and a more personal one than most, which I think is kind of fun to get to know me, my family, learn a little bit more about what I am about, and how I came to be who I am. I hope you really enjoy it. If you like this episode or any other, please feel free to share episodes, let people know about the podcast, leave me good reviews on your podcast platform of choice, and of course, send me feedback directly. You can email me at Conor, C-O-N-O-R, @Renoites.com. I would love to hear your guest suggestions, your feedback, your ideas of topics. Also, follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me at Renoites. And now, this week's guest for Mother's Day, my mom, Michele McQuivey. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. Have you listened to my podcast? I hate to put you on the spot, but is this your first time actually engaging with my podcast?
Yes, it is.
That's okay. At least that way we know that you will listen to at least this one episode. So this episode is being recorded on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
Thank you, honey.
We just had a brunch at your house with family. It was really nice to have everyone together. So to introduce you to my podcast audience, I think maybe the best way is just for you to tell me how you got to Reno, because you raised your family here. All of your kids live here in Reno. This is where you decided to have a family. So can you just kind of tell me what brought you to be a mom in Reno? You were born and raised in Australia, and then kind of like what was your path to end up here in the late 70s in Reno?
Well, I was, before I moved to Reno, I lived in Las Vegas for 7 years. And before that, I traveled a lot before I went to Las Vegas in my earlier career. My earlier career took me to a lot of different places. I worked in Europe and in Montreal and a year in the Bahamas, South America, a lot of travel. And then finally, I went to Las Vegas in 1975. I actually went for a vacation, and for some reason, that vacation ended up lasting 7 years. And so then after that, 7 years in, I moved up to Reno from Las Vegas, and that was in 1982, and I've been here ever since.
Cool. Can we brag a little bit about your previous career? Because I think it's really cool. So you were a professional dancer in big shows in Las Vegas and traveling all around the world, right? So you trained in ballet and you worked on some big shows on the Strip. Can you talk about your dance career and how cool that was? Because I think it's one of the neat things about your pre-mom times.
Well, I sort of come from a dancing family. My aunt was my dance instructor, and my older brother was also a dancer, very, very well known in Australia, and also with the Royal Ballet Company in London for many years. And so that's where I danced all my life. And then the first opportunity I had I did work in Australia, and I worked all through Australia in a show called Funny Girl, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. We did not have Barbara Streisand as the lead, but we had a wonderful Australian actress and singer. And then I had the opportunity to travel through Europe with a group of about 6 girls and one woman in charge of us. And we started off in Athens, Greece, and then we worked in Italy, in a few different places in Italy, Milan, San Remo, Venice, a couple of times in Venice. And then our boss flew us all to Montreal, and we worked there. There was a show there called, it was at the Le Chateau Champlain, actually was the name of the hotel. And I worked there and then traveled, spent a year in the Bahamas. And I did go back to Australia after a couple of years after my mother passed away in 1970. And I did stay at home for about almost 2 years because I had a little sister who was only 11 and my younger brother was only 13. So I did stay at home for a couple of years to help my father. And then I left again and I went to London. And after that, I traveled through South America with another group and then ended up back in Montreal and then ultimately in Las Vegas. And so then I worked at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas. And I did a couple of other shows. I did one show down at the Union Plaza. I worked with Michele McQuivey, who actually was the wife of Steve McQueen, the mother of their children, mother of his children. And so it was a very fun career. It was a lot of hard work. When I worked at the Tropicana, I specialized in adagio dancing, which most people are not familiar with that term. But what that means is that you work with a partner, and a lot of the time you're in the air. And so it's really demanding. I went to class every day. I worked with my partner for 30 minutes every night before the show, and very, very demanding, but rewarding, exciting. Just something that's all I knew. All I knew was dance, until I was about the age of 30.
That's fun. I think that's so cool to have a fun kind of career that's in the arts and in front of an audience. And I think it's really awesome. There's this picture of you that I have on my bookshelf with the giant like feather headdress thing and all of the sequins. And it's really cool to be like, oh yeah, that's my mom. Like such a babe, such a cool thing.
Well, let me tell you that is not what I did. That costume that I had on in that photograph was only used at the end of the show for me to walk down the stairs and take a bow. That is not what I wore when I worked because, as I say, adagio was up in the air most of the time. And that was just coming down the stairs when I worked as the principal dancer, to come down the stairs at the end of the show and be announced. And so, of course, you look a little bit more glamorous coming down the stairs. So, and just strangely enough, my partner's name was Michel. So he was a French boy. So we had Michel and Michel.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, no, I think glamorous is a good word for it, for sure. I know that you have these reservations that people will misinterpret what you did. And that there's this notion of the showgirl or whatever, which you weren't. And you don't want people to get that idea when you say dance that people have the wrong concept of it. So I know you're hesitant to talk about that as a big part of the conversation, but it's just so cool that you had this exciting, glamorous career. And I'd rather talk about it and clarify that it was not a showgirl thing and let people know how cool it was than avoid it entirely. Because that feels like such a bummer to cut that huge part of your life out. So you were in Vegas, but then you left dancing when you got pregnant with Leslie, who's my older sister? And how did you go from that career into motherhood? Did you always want to be a mom? What was that transition like for you?
Well, I had been married for 4 years, and no, I did not want to be a mom. I was extremely career oriented. That's all that was really important to me at the time. And we'd been married for 4 years, and then I turned 30, and I have no idea why, but, like they say, the biological clock sort of kicks in. And even though we had decided not to have children, when we married, we didn't, he was quite a few years older than I was. And so we had decided we were not going to have children. But then at 30, something happened. And I said, oh, my goodness, if I want to have children, I'd better have it now. Because in those days, we had our children younger as compared to these days where, women are having babies, in their 40s and mid-40s. But so we just decided, okay. And then I got pregnant with my daughter, your sister. And then the career, it didn't have to be over the career. After she was born, I had many opportunities to go back to work and offers of jobs. But once you have that child, your priorities change. You have a whole different life. You're responsible for a tiny little human being. And I had, of course, being in show business, I'd always worked evenings. And, I didn't want to work evenings. I didn't want to be away from my baby. And so basically that was the end of my career. And I felt that I had done very well and been very successful and didn't really, have that much ambition to achieve any more. And so motherhood was my first priority.
So you raised Leslie in Las Vegas for the first few years, but then moved up here to Reno. So you met my dad and moved up here with him, with Leslie, and that's when I was born, shortly after you moved up to Reno, right?
That's correct.
So what brought you to Reno, and was raising kids a factor in where you wanted to live? What were the considerations that went into living in Reno and raising a family here? Did you know much about Reno? Had you been here before? Generally, what's your thoughts on Reno as a place to raise a family back then?
No, I had never been to Reno, but your father worked for the Department of Wildlife as a wildlife biologist, as you know, and he had the opportunity to move to Reno to a higher position with the Department of Wildlife. And I encouraged him to do that because it was, a better job, and just not that necessarily it was more money, but it was just a better position. It was one of the 4 chiefs of the Department of Wildlife, and I encouraged him to take that position. And basically that's why we moved to Reno, for that reason. And I had never been to Reno before, but I liked it very much. And obviously still do many years later, almost 40.
So you moved up to Reno, you had me, and then my little brother Dane about, a year and a half later, and you were a stay-at-home mom for the first part of our lives. So what was that transition like, going from working, and even when you were in Vegas with Leslie, I know you were working as well at that time, but then up in Reno, it seems like you had a pretty different way of being able to raise kids. So what was it like being a stay-at-home mom for a while and raising several kids without the stress of work around you?
Well, I actually loved it, and I was very grateful for the opportunity that I could stay at home with my children. Your grandmother on your father's side was always a stay-at-home mum. And as you know, she had 4 children, and she was a stay-at-home mum. And I think your father wanted me to be a stay-at-home mum, to do just to look after your kids, and just be at home, and we could manage that without me working, which was really nice. And so I loved it. Actually, I loved it for quite a few years. I mean, I did love it for, I can't remember how many years, 5 years maybe, that I didn't work. And then once you boys got a little bit older and started school, then I did want to work again.
Was that largely out of boredom? Like, when the kids go to school, did you just find yourself wanting something else to do and to fill your time and to be interested in, besides, I don't know, what stay-at-home moms do during the day?
Well, I think I'm just a very, very independent person. I've never wanted to depend on anybody, even though I was, married to your dad and everything was fine and wonderful. There was something about me that my independence kicked in, and I just wanted to do some type of work, and it didn't matter what it was, but it was something, and maybe it was a little bit of boredom, when the kids were at school all day, something to do, and, to meet people. You can only clean so much, cook so much. So that's when I got a job. Well, actually, I worked for America West Airlines. And I got that job primarily because, you can travel. And it was a wonderful opportunity because after 1 year of working for them, you were able to fly very, very inexpensively to Australia. And so you would not remember, I'm sure, but, I did manage to take everybody to Australia and the kids when you were all little to see my family there.
Have you always had that independent streak, do you think? Well, it sounds like with your previous career in dancing, that was travel and working independently and being out there in the world by yourself. And then a few years of stay-at-home momming. Was it that same kind of desire for adventure and something new and something exciting, you think, that drove you back out of the house to do more things?
I don't really think it was a desire to do anything exciting. I think it was just, I don't know that I was ever meant to be somebody that just stayed at home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was wonderful when you kids were all very young. I loved it. But I just don't think I was that type of person that just didn't want to work. I enjoyed work. I enjoyed getting out and meeting people. And there was no reason why I wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So, why not? When you were all in school.
Right. I feel like part of the reason to work too is providing materially for your family. Obviously, you want to be able to have money and income and be able to give your family what they need. And I think that that's been a big part of the story of raising your family in the last 20 years or whatever, or after we were out of elementary school and after you and dad separated. Obviously, work was very important. Do you think that caring for your kids and providing materially has been a big driver of why you're so ambitious in the real estate work that you did and your career in the later years of your life?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I that is very true. I did want to. I needed to work. When your father and I separated, I needed to work and to support you. And because basically, as I say, an independent person, I did. And if you recall, I did work very hard and long hours. That actually was not out of choice. I was happy to do it, but it was out of necessity. Mm-hmm. Because, I have 3 children. I can't remember your ages exactly. I think 12, 13, and 16, roundabout. I mean, 3 children at home, you need to support them. Your father, of course, helped. He was wonderful in that respect, but nevertheless, I still needed to work. And so and I had always just had little jobs. I did, in the first few years in Reno, I did teach gymnastics at a couple of elementary schools. And then I did, as I said, I did work for America West Airlines. And then I also worked for the Convention Authority for a couple of years. So I did have sort of little jobs here and there. I mean, not enough to support a family, but enough to have some little extra luxuries, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
And help with the finances. Your father had a wonderful job, but he was a state employee. And we all know that state employees are not, they don't get great salaries, but they have very good retirement.
Right.
They're the benefits of working for the state. So that's basically why I went into my next career, was to support you children.
Mm-hmm. Going back a little bit, did you always know how many kids you wanted? You said that, the maternal instinct kicked in and you ended up with 3 kids. Did you have any idea of like what size of family you wanted or how old you wanted to be when you had all your kids? How planned, and I've heard you mention that you had 4 siblings and that you have this idea that very often moms will want to have the same kind of family that they grew up in. Do you think that's the case? And is that something that you thought about as you were, putting your family together?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the reasons Leslie's father and I separated was because he did not want any more children. He was very happy with the one, and he said, "You have such a beautiful daughter. I don't know why you can't be happy." And I said, "Well, I have such a beautiful daughter. I want to have more." Mm-hmm. And so, it was a very big bone of contention. And so when I married your father, yes, of course, we knew we were going to have another child. That was just a given. I would have liked 4 total. I would have, but, well, to be honest, your father didn't want any more either, because it is a big responsibility for a father. Mm-hmm. And so after your younger brother was born, he had decided that we wouldn't have any more. I would have liked 1 more. But in retrospect, you have 3 wonderful, wonderful kids, and I'm happy.
That's good. Glad to hear that.
Mm-hmm. You've all turned out very well. Very proud of all of you.
Yeah, I was going to say that seems like one of the things that I'm very grateful for is that the 3 of us here in Reno all have a really good relationship, that we all get along really well. And it's great being kind of an adult family all here in the same city. And we'll talk about more of that in a sec. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you about how you learned to be a mom too, because like you mentioned, your mom passed away at a relatively young age before I was born. So do you think that you learned a lot about how to be a mom from your upbringing? And you said you went back to Australia to help with your little brother and little sister after your mom passed away. Where do you think you learned to be a mom? It's a different world nowadays. Now there's mom blogs and podcasts and a completely connected internet where moms learn and, are very under the microscope about how they're parenting. But 30 years ago, that obviously was not the case. There was, books for moms, but do you think that the way of raising kids has changed a lot between when you were raising kids and what's going on now? And where did you go to for support and to learn and to figure out what you were doing? What was that like, 30, 40 years ago, trying to raise a kid before the internet?
For me, I didn't really have any help, because Leslie was born in Las Vegas and her father's parents lived in Arizona. And so I didn't have a mother and I didn't have a mother-in-law, that could help. And then, of course, when you and your brother were born, your grandparents were in Utah. Mm-hmm. So once again, I know that your grandmother came down and spent a week, but I didn't have any physical help with any of you, actually, from, a parent. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I learned from my mother, especially. I think it's just a natural instinct. It just comes naturally when you're a mother. It just comes naturally. There were some things I remember, like growing up, we always had dinner together as a family. My mother actually worked because we owned a business, so my mother did work. But we always had dinner together as a family. And I know with your father, that was very important to him that we all had dinner together of an evening and discussed the day and, what had happened during the day. I think those things are important. It wasn't like that. It was at the beginning with him, but not afterwards because, with work schedules and people now, and see, in those days, the mothers didn't work, but in this day and age, it's very, very unusual to see a stay-at-home mother. Because most of the people I know, the mothers all work, because you need two incomes in this day and age. Mm-hmm. I think it's different. I think it's crucial that you try to spend dinner in the evenings together with the family, if possible. It's not always possible, but if possible. But I just think motherhood, well, for me anyhow, came naturally. I probably made mistakes. We all make mistakes, but I think it came naturally. I don't really think I learned that much from my upbringing.
Do you think you had support or help from friends? We talked a little bit earlier today about a babysitting co-op that you were a part of, which I thought was really interesting because as far as I know, that doesn't really seem to exist nowadays. And Christine, my brother's wife, was talking about how there's not as much trust. Like it would be weird, she thought, to leave your kids with, people that just happen to be in a babysitting co-op with you and they're more comfortable with a school or daycare kind of environment. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me a little bit about what the co-op was and how it worked? Because I think it's a really interesting way of taking care of kids that's very community oriented, which we seem to have moved away from, but seems like it would be a really good idea and a helpful way for especially working mothers to have some flexible childcare. Can you just tell me what the co-op was and how it worked?
Well, I thought it was wonderful. I believe there might have been 20 women in mine. Can't quite remember. But we were all mothers with young children, and I think you could only bring the children up to about, I believe, maybe age 7 or something like that, only young children. And like I said, in those days, they were all mothers that were not working because we didn't work. We were fortunate we didn't have to work. But, people need time to themselves and some free time. And that there was no money involved, which was lovely. It was just like babysitting exchange, like I would drop you and your brother off for a couple of hours, like even if you just want to go shopping or have lunch with a girlfriend or something. And then I would reciprocate, not with that particular mother, but with one of the other mothers. And, I think we all knew one another. I think we all trusted one another and we all had our own babies. And so we did trust one another. For me, it was absolutely wonderful because it gave me some free time. And in those days, I liked to play tennis, and so I could play tennis and then come back and pick up my children. I don't know if they exist now. They may exist. I don't know. I mean, I don't know anybody with little babies, but I haven't heard of any, to be quite honest. But I think that is because, like, compared to over 30 years ago, to me, it seems like so many mothers have a job and work. And so children now, I think, little children actually go to daycare or preschool as opposed to a babysitting co-op. Like my own, like your brother. I mean, his two little boys go to preschool, because Christine has to work.
Right.
So, I think, I don't know if they exist anymore. But for me, it was a wonderful outlet. And then it's very nice socially for the children too, because they've got other little children to play with, and they learn to be kind and share. They learn to share and things like that.
Did you make friends? You mentioned socialization for the kids. Was it also a good social opportunity for the moms to get to know each other and to connect with other moms in town? Did you make friends from there? And was that a helpful part of the parenting and social process to have like a group of moms? Is this like in the pre-internet age?
Mm-hmm. It was, but when I think back to all the mums that were in my co-op, I don't have a friendship with any of them now. It's been over 30 years, but I don't. I mean, I'm assuming most of them still live here in Reno, but it's not really we didn't really develop friendships, the parents. It was more for the children, and then once the children went to school, and you were out of the co-op, you sort of didn't keep in contact with those parents, with those mothers.
Gotcha. So it was more kind of a functional thing to help moms have care for their kids, but it wasn't necessarily a social group. Did you have friends with kids the same age? Like we grew up with the Redshaws. So you had your friend Elizabeth, who was a best friend who had kids basically the same age. What was that experience like, kind of raising your kids along with a friend who are of similar ages? Can you talk a little bit about that experience of having friends who are also moms and raising kids together, like as neighbors, basically?
Yeah, that was nice. We used to have once in a while little play groups where the mums would get together and have a cup of tea, and then the kids would play together a little bit, but not so much. I mean, Elizabeth, as you mentioned, and a couple of other friends, but not so much once the kids started school.
So after you worked your part-time jobs and kind of worked your way back into the workforce, when me and Dane were probably like elementary school age, once we were back to school, there was another big shift where you really dedicated yourself to work in a career in real estate. And you've been so successful in that, that's less related to the parenting thing, I think, except for it really did take a lot of time and energy. I remember as a teenager, you were working all the time. That was a huge part of our family dynamic, was mom was always working on real estate stuff. So can you actually tell me a little bit about what it felt like to be a mom to teenagers who was trying to build a career in real estate, something that took a lot of time and energy and really a ton of dedication? What did that feel like, trying to balance those things?
Well, it was actually scary at first because, when you have three children who are, 11, 12, 15, whatever you were, as a single mother, it's a very scary thought, knowing that, you have to support them. So that's when I, started in my career in real estate, which I am still in now, even now after 26 years. And I worked, as my kids will tell you, 24/7. I worked very hard, but all I wanted was to give them a good life. I didn't want them to go without, and to give them a good life. And there were times when I wouldn't say that they were neglected, but there were times when probably I was unable to be with them when I should have been around meal times. But, there was a big choice to make. It was a very big choice to make. And did I make the right decision? I feel like I did, because now my children are reaping the benefits of my hard work. And I think they realize that. I mean, they really are reaping the benefits of it. And it's my joy and pleasure that they are, and that we're in the position that now we can do things together. We can travel together, and we can go on nice vacations together because of the hard work. And I think they understand that. And so it's been a wonderful career for 26 years, and I've been very grateful, so grateful that I have been very successful and managed to have a nice lifestyle for myself and for my children.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the way that I think of that is in terms of investment, where when you invest initially in something with hopes of it growing and paying off rewards, there are drawbacks to that. It costs something when you are looking to the future. And I think one of the costs at that time was we didn't see you as much. You were very busy all the time, and that was challenging as a teenager. But I think that you were very cognizant of that and looking to the future of what your family could be as we all grew up. It feels like it really has turned out in the way that you probably hoped, in that now we have security and stability that lets us spend more time together, that lets all of your kids live a life that is better than it would have been otherwise. So it's challenging to reconcile those things because, as a kid, you want more attention and you want more time, and it's easy to feel neglected or forgotten or whatever you want to call it. But I look at our lives now, and all I have is gratitude for what you have built for our family.
And I am proud to say that I've done it myself, and I've enjoyed it. And we are reaping the benefits, and I think that's wonderful.
What do you think makes a good mom?
Well, I don't know. I like to think I'm a good mom.
You're definitely a good mom. I'm just curious what you consider. Like, I know that you're a good mom, and I could kind of describe the ways in which you're a good mom, but I'm curious, as a mother yourself, what do you think the goals are, the ideals are, if you were to, describe those things that go into being a good mom? How would you do it? I mean, I can tell you my take, but I'm curious about what you think, since you're the one doing it.
Well, I think that one of the most important things is to teach your children to be kind to everybody. I think that's crucial. Be kind to everybody. Don't be mean to anybody. Everybody's different. All children are different. Some children have, some issues, and some don't. And just be kind and generous and honest. Tell the truth. I don't know. Just be nice and kind and considerate of everybody.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I think makes a good mother is being supportive, which is something that I find is the key to our relationship in our family. Is I would describe you as a very supportive mother. You've had kids with different life trajectories and different challenges, but I don't think there's ever been a time in my life where I didn't feel like you were there and available and helpful. I think that there are really unfortunate situations where kids feel detached enough from their parents that they don't feel like their mom or their dad is there for them. So I think, to me, one of the keys of being a quote unquote good mom is just being supportive and present and available to listen, to be accepting. I think that has been a huge key, and it's a big part of, I think, why all of your kids feel so comfortable and at home with you, even now as adults. As we've grown into our own lives, we still have this sense that mom is there for us.
Always supportive. That's true. I've always supported you, even in the bad times. The good times, the bad times. I do think that I have always been there. Maybe sometimes not quite consistent. Consistency with children is very important. But sometimes it's difficult too. But I do feel that I've always been supportive of all of you, even in things that I may not have liked or disagreed with. I've always tried to let all of you be yourselves and who you are, and support you, even, as I say, if it was not something that I would would have wanted. But, that is your life, and I've always been there and will always be there.
What's it like being a mom of adults? Because I think a lot of times we talk about parenting and being a mother, and the immediate context for that is raising children. That's the conversation we have.
Mm-hmm.
All these conversations around parenting and motherhood are very focused, obviously, importantly, on those developmental years and those younger years. Mm-hmm. But you don't stop being a mom when your kids turn 18. Mm-hmm. So what's it like being a mom of now, adults, and, both of my siblings have kids and you're a grandma? What's that experience like, the motherhood experience as an adult, when your kids don't necessarily live at home or need you and they have their own lives, but you're still definitely the mom in our whole family? Like, you're central to our family. So what's that experience like, being grown-up mom?
I absolutely love it. I think grown-up mom is, it's the best of both worlds. It's just wonderful, because all of a sudden, you are my children, of course, and I know you respect me and look up to me, but I respect all of you. I can relate to you. I relate to you more as an adult, as adults, as to my children. We're not equal, but I relate to you as an adult, and I feel that we can have adult conversations. We can share stuff. I don't want to say, well, we're best friends, because I hear that all the time. Well, my daughter's my best friend, and your kids are not my best friends. I have friends and I have best friends. You're not my best friends. You're my kids.
I disagree. We're best friends.
No, you're my kids. You're my kids, and I love you and I love being with you. But I don't think I would say, well, you're my best friend,
Right. We're not like going out and getting drunk on the weekends.
No, you're my kids, and I just love being with all of you. And I think we have the three of you and I think we all have an amazing relationship with each other and all together. And I think I consider myself incredibly fortunate, because I do know of many people whose children, the siblings, they do not get along and they don't like one another. There's no communication. And not just one or two people, many people I know whose siblings don't get along. And it's very sad, because I just feel like I am so fortunate to have all of you that are so wonderful. I love being with all of you together individually, and you three kids just seem to get along so well. Now, it's kids you didn't always. I mean, you didn't always get along when you were younger, but because you're all grown and mature, and I think you've become closer as adults than what you were as children. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know if you feel that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I feel that you're much, much closer than, growing up. I just have fun with you all. I love it. In fact, as you know, being the only one that doesn't have children, I don't like it when you go for 3 or 4 days and I don't see you. So, but I love to see you all and be with you all. I'm blessed.
Yeah. What do you think has led to that? So, like you said, you know a lot of families that aren't as close as they grow up, and they grow apart, or they have these divisions. What do you think it is about you or about us that has kept our family pretty strong and tightly connected as we've grown into adults and, had families of our own and those kind of things?
Well, I think I'm fortunate because you all live in Reno, and I think that does help. I think if children are in different states, it's a little bit more difficult, but you all are here in Reno, which does help. And I think because I try, not every week, but as you know, I try often to have you all come over for family dinners. And I think that's important, to have you, not every Sunday or for example, but, fairly often to come. Let's come to Mum's and, have dinner or spend the afternoon or something. And, we try to spend that time together. And I think that's crucial. Mm-hmm. And I think that's helped. I think that's why we are close.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that, like you mentioned earlier, you enjoy seeing your kids as grown-ups and being able to relate to them in a different way. And I think it also works in the reverse. As we have grown up and become adults, it's also helped us relate to you as an adult and an
Hmm.
independent woman and a complex person rather than just mom. So I think that I appreciate that as we've kind of grown into this adult family, that again, maybe we're not best friends in the social sense, but there is
Right.
a certain level of respect for the work that you've done, the careers that you've had, the way that you raised us, that we probably weren't really able to appreciate when we were younger and less mature. And now, as adults, being able to see you as an adult and a more complex person than when we were kids, I think helps build that level of respect and understanding and better communication that can't really exist between a parent and their child until,
Right.
until we're all grown up.
Until adulthood. And when we're all together, I think it's wonderful. But also when I'm with each one of you individually, it's different. Each one of you are so different. And the conversations that you and I would have are very different to a conversation I would have with your sister, and very different to a conversation I would have with your brother. I mean, each one of you are very individual. And it's fun to be with all together, and it's fun to be with each one of you. You and I will talk a little bit more politically compared to, your sister, and then, with your brother. Well, I don't know about him. We talk about, I don't know, remodeling the house or whatever, But you're all just so different, and each one of you are so fun to be with, and then all together we're great together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that probably helps that you had several kids and you can have this kind of diversity of experience of your kids. If you only have one kid, you only have one parental relationship. And
Correct.
that probably, I imagine, is scary for a lot of moms, where if that relationship is not good, then that's all you've got. But it's probably nice to have several kids with different personalities and different life stories that you can look and see, okay, these are all of the experiences of my kids and the different paths that they've taken. I'm sure that is extra rewarding, being able to see those multiple paths that you've kind of created in this world.
I think so too. And also because when I was younger, I was very fortunate to be able to travel a lot. I've really traveled a lot in my younger years. I mean, not much since I turned 30, but I mean, I traveled a lot in my younger years. And that's a great experience in life, to travel. It really, really is, to be able to travel and to go to Europe and all different countries in the world. And I think that's something that you can relate to with your children. I mean, your kids haven't done that much traveling, but hopefully you will. You're still very young. And hopefully we can all do it together also, and that's one of my goals, that now, as you know, that once a year we take a family vacation and we go to somewhere every year, somewhere different. And that's my goal anyhow, that I take all of you, and of course all the grandkids, the beautiful grandkids, on a family vacation, because I'd like you to be able to experience that travel, because the travel that I did was a wonderful experience, and I would like all of you to be able to experience that as well.
Mm-hmm. How much of the family element is key to that? Because we could always travel independently. I've done some traveling, but I think that part of the fun of these family vacations, which we've done a couple of, we all went to Australia a few years ago, and we all went to Hawaii a few years ago.
We went on the cruise.
Oh yeah, we went on a cruise. So getting the whole family together, I really, really enjoy. Do you think that that is also a key to these travel experiences, is that we get to do it together as a family and create shared memories, instead of like when you were traveling, you were doing it for work and you were doing it by yourself, or not necessarily by yourself, but not with your family.
Yeah.
Do you think that the family vacation is obviously a better way or a more important way of doing travel?
Well, I don't know that it's better or more important, but for me, it's more fun. For me, it's fun. I hope in the years to come, when I'm not here, that your kids will still do things together. And I want you to say, remember when we went on this trip with Mum, I want you to remember family vacations with me as opposed to not with me, And I mean, we've done a few, and I hope that we can do a lot more because I think they're wonderful memories, And I mean, you three could all go away on a vacation together, but I don't know if you would. I don't know if you would go on vacation, the three kids together. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. But if I'm here and we all go, I think that's just a wonderful memory. And for me, it's wonderful, and I have such a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I don't know that we would travel together, the three siblings, without you. And I've always thought of you as the center of this family. Like, that's when I think of how our family works, you are this, like, you're the magnet, you're the glue, you're this like core of our family that we all kind of revolve around. And that's kept us in Reno. It has kept us close to each other. It has kept our relationships as siblings close to each other. So I think that by you kind of creating these family vacations and bringing us together, that's been a pretty big key in keeping us close to each other for those kind of travels and stuff.
And actually, it's true. And that's with my mother. She was the center of the family. She was the family, and it was everything surrounded her. She was the family. And when she passed away, it fell apart. Actually, it fell apart. Of course, the children were much younger than what you all are, but she was the center. And so in that respect, I am like her. Mm-hmm. I think I'm like her. So it's nice. It's nice because you don't always see that. So I'm grateful for that because as I have, today, perfect example today, Mother's Day, 2 girlfriends here. They both have 2 children, and neither one of their kids were here. So for me, it's wonderful to have everybody here. I hope nobody moves from Reno. I mean, you did. You were gone for a long time. You were gone for about 17 years. Mm-hmm. But, I'm very grateful and fortunate that you came back.
Yeah. And I mean, a big part of the reason that I came back to Reno is family. Right. I love Reno as a city. I'm really excited about what's going on in Reno. I think it's a great place to live. I have roots here as far as I'm familiar with the city, that kind of thing. But the real driving force behind me coming back to Reno and staying in Reno is that this is where my family is. And more specifically, this is where my mom is. That's a huge part of the equation. So I think that's an important thing to note, is that it's not just I want to have a relationship with my family, but like I mentioned, you're like the center. It's like a magnet. I feel like no matter what, I would have ended up back in Reno because this is where, the core of everything is, what you've built with our family.
And Reno's a lovely place to live.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we have our 4 seasons, and it's a very nice place to live. It's getting bigger and whatever, but, and I think it's quite good to raise children here. We have, of course, a certain amount of crime as in anywhere, any place. But overall, I think it's a very safe place to live. And I like living here. I love living here. I mean, there are other places I could live. I mean, I'd be happy. I could live in San Francisco and places like that I love. I would never move because of your children. But, you could do worse than living in Reno, really. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty nice place.
Yeah. What's it like being a grandma?
Wonderful. I love having my grandchildren. They're all beautiful kids. I like being a grandmother.
How does it compare to being a mom? Like, mom is the hard work, it's the raising the kids, all of that. And then grandma is, you get the growing up kids experience, but you only have to deal with certain parts of it and not others. How do you compare those two? I know you love seeing the grandkids, but do you miss some of the control or the ability to, have a real influence? Obviously you have an influence on your grandkids, but not the same way you do with your immediate children. So how do you compare those two? What are the things that you like or dislike, or the differences between it you think that you appreciate?
Well, I love having the grandkids and I love seeing them, but you're young and you probably don't understand this, but the older you get, the less patience you get. And much and all as I love having them, as anyone will tell you, they love their grandkids, but they go home with their parents.
Mhm.
And, I love having them here around, but do I want to have little kids living with me? Again, even my own beautiful grandkids, the answer would be no. No, because they're adorable, but, age does strange things to you, and you become less patient, and I don't know, I adore them, but no, I don't want little kids around me 24/7. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a different love. You love your kids. I love my kids. I'm crazy about my grandkids, but it's a different love. It's not more. It's not less. It's just different. You love them differently because they're your children's children.
Mm-hmm.
They're not your children. They're your kids' kids, and it's different.
Do you find it challenging sometimes not to try to impose your own mothering on your grandkids? I assume that is part of the grandma dynamic, is sometimes grandmas want to do things their way or the way they raise their kids. Do you ever butt heads with Dane or Leslie about raising kids?
Very, very rarely. I always try to stay out of their lives when it comes to raising their children. It's not my job. It's not my job to raise the grandkids. If they do something that I don't like, I would reprimand them if they're in my house. If they were at their own home, I would never reprimand them. I would reprimand them in my home, and I don't always agree with the parenting, but that's not my job, and it's not my position. And, once in a while I might just say, look, why don't you try this or why don't you try that as a suggestion, but I would never try to control the situation or take over. Mm-hmm. No. And I do think, I think Dane and Christine are wonderful parents. And I think Leslie and Eric are very good parents. I mean, would I do things the way they do? Some things I would, some things I probably wouldn't. But, that's not my job. Mm-hmm. That's not my job. And I don't want that job.
Right. And I think, like you mentioned, having this adult relationship with your kids also means recognizing that they're independent, mature people who make their own decisions and live their own lives. And obviously you have a respect for that enough to not place yourself in a position that is not for you.
Right. And, and I grew up, the way I grew up is so different to the way I raised you all, and very different again to the way parents are raising their children now. I mean, in my opinion, kids are allowed to do things today that of course, when I grew up in Australia, I mean, it would never happen. And even with you kids, I mean, I think that children these days, this is just my opinion, I think they're allowed too many liberties. I really do. And they're allowed to grow up too quickly. They don't seem to have a childhood or, an adolescent. It was just so different to my upbringing. My upbringing is just like day and night compared to the way kids are brought up today in this country. Does it make one right and one wrong? Not necessarily. It just makes it different. I think Leslie and Dane and Christine and Eric, I think they do a good job. But, I went to the Catholic convent. We weren't allowed to do anything, so it's a little bit different.
Right. Do you think that was better? I mean, do you think that parents should be more strict? Like, do kids need to get whacked with a ruler now and then, or?
I don't think they need to get whacked with a ruler, but I think it could be a little stricter. I think parents today seem to be a little more lenient than what I would be. But as I say, I don't say anything because once again, it's not my job. Mm-hmm. But I think parents are lenient today.
Do you think that you changed your parenting with the times over the years? Like, as you've seen parenting change, and obviously very much in the, I think, last 20 years or so in the post-internet, everything's connected way, I think that's a whole different world of raising kids than it was before. When every 10-year-old mm-hmm. has an iPhone, that's a whole different set of mm-hmm. rules and expectations and stuff around kids. But do you think that as you had kids and they grew up, did you find yourself parenting in different ways or kind of adapting your parenting as the times changed? Or did you have like a pretty solid concept of what it meant to be a parent and how to do it that you feel like you stuck with?
Well, I think I changed a little, but I still think the basic things that I believe in, I still try to instill into you kids, whether I did or not. And I can give you a couple of examples. Okay, when somebody gives you a gift, I believe you truly need to sit down and write a thank you card and put it in the mail. And I actually give the cards sometimes to Dana Christine, so they write it and I address the envelope, because they wouldn't do it, and Leslie wouldn't do it either. But I think that's just good manners. I think that's good manners to write a thank you card when you're given a gift. I don't know any kids that do that these days. So that's one thing. I think it's a shame that parents don't make their children sit down and say, right, and not to maybe a grandmother or someone, but, to a friend or whatever, thank you for the gift. It doesn't take very much, and it's just good manners. So that's something I think is a shame, that kids today don't seem to have the respect that I think we did growing up. They just don't seem to have the respect growing up. And another thing that I disagree with strongly is the way that kids today, including my own grandchildren, that are constantly on their phone and playing, and you go out for dinner and you sit at the table and the kids are on their phone playing. And that is because 90% of the time the parents are as well. And I think it's so wrong. I just think it's so wrong. And the parents are on the phone. You go to a restaurant and you see couples having dinner and they're not even talking to one another. They're both on their phones. And so you go out for dinner with the grandkids and they don't converse with you. They don't talk to you. They're just on their phone. See, I think that's so wrong. I mean, you boys didn't do it. Well, you didn't have phones then anyhow.
Exactly.
But even if you had, I would not have allowed it. I would not have allowed you go out for a family dinner, you converse with one another. You don't sit there on your phone. I would not have allowed it, but I know everybody does.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that's one of the challenges of being a parent nowadays, is that there is this societal standard of not paying as much attention to the person that you're with because you're distracted by your phone. Your attention span has been wrecked from basically using social media all the time, and it has diminished our ability to have those like sit down family dinners.
That's right.
Not just because we are looking at our phone, but I think we've also kind of lost some of the skills and ability to just pay attention to someone and converse.
Yes, and to converse. I think so too. And I mean, can they sit and have a conversation or not? Probably not, half of them, because they don't know. They haven't been exposed to it because they've all got their phones and iPads or whatever. And, it's not good because they won't, they've got to develop, you've got to have those skills in life. And if you don't have them growing up, then how are you going to be as an adult? And the sad part is that most adults are the same. Like I said, you go to a restaurant, it's amazing to me to see couples out for dinner, not so much older couples, but, your age, couples, and they're both on their phones. I mean, why go out for dinner? Why not just stay at home and have dinner at home and be on your phone at home? I find that I don't like that at all. But, it's a different generation. Every generation is different. But I worry about the kids, the younger kids who have that lifestyle, and they're not learning any skills, how to communicate with people. How are they going to be as adults if they don't learn how to communicate and learn those skills?
What other advice or recommendations would you have for new parents today? Obviously, the culture has changed. A lot of things are different, but you raised kids very successfully. So if someone were to ask you, hey, I'm about to have a kid, give me some words of wisdom, what would you tell them? What kind of advice would you give? Obviously, teaching your kids to communicate, those values that you talked about are super important. Is there anything else that you think you would warn a new parent about or or give them some advice about that you think is key to making sure that they end up with a family, as connected as ours?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Unconditional love, of course. Unconditional love, even in the tough times. I don't know. It's a different, I'm old school. I'm old and I'm old school. What recommendation can I give a new mother? Nothing really, just unconditional love. I always felt a good whack on the behind wasn't such a bad thing. But of course, in these days, you'd be reported to the police. If you give your kids a smack on the behind. So I don't know. I'm probably not a good person to ask that question.
Yeah, I'm generally not in favor of spanking, but I do definitely remember being like threatened with a wooden spoon, and I turned out okay. So I think it doesn't always, it's not always the worst thing. I don't support it. I wouldn't recommend any parents do it.
Did you ever get hit with the wooden spoon though?
I'm pretty sure that a couple times.
I'm not sure. I think I just
maybe not a hard one or anything. There's definitely a line between the threat of a whack, a weak whack, and then there's actual like striking your child, which is a whole nother category.
That's
of
a whole nother category.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that there was never any actual like violence in our household. But yeah, so if your advice is that we should bring back spankings, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you on that one.
Not at all. I remember the wooden spoon, just banging it on the table as the warning.
Sometimes that's enough.
That's enough as a wooden spoon. Just getting it out and sort of waving it in the air.
Oh, yeah, we were terrified. And that's something that crosses across a lot of cultures, too. I think that, nowadays not so much, but I think that was a pretty traditional part of parenting when I was growing up, was the threat of mild violence to keep kids in check.
I wouldn't say mild violence, but the threat of not mild violence, but the threat of a whack on the bottom,
Right.
But it's sad, though, because, we had a neighbor, as you might recall, that used to take the belt out of his trousers and belt his children, with his belt, when we lived in the house that you grew up in. And I think it's just, outrageous. It's cruelty, and it's so wrong. It's so wrong. No kid's perfect. All kids are going to test you. Every kid will test you. That's just a fact of life. But it's unconditional love. Stick by them. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. You just have to always be there. And if they've got the good ground, from the time they're little, and the rules and consistency in rules and unconditional love, even in some bad times, they'll turn around. They'll turn out okay. We've proven that in our family.
Yeah, I think that is the great lesson of our family, is that through the years, through challenges, through difficulties for all of us, all of your kids have strayed away and come back, have had their own challenges personally. But I think that by you always being there and us having a foundation that we always knew we could come back to, having that sense of security, I think that has been one of the things that's led to us being able to be all together as a family now. If at any point in that story you had not been there, or we had not felt welcome, or we had been scared to come to you or to come home, or if we didn't feel supported, I think it would have been very easy for parts of our family to fall apart or to break off. And I think that having that security and that stability has been so key, and here we are. It's brought us all back together.
And it's a great feeling.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I am so excited that we got to have a conversation all about being a mom. I actually learned some things like that we had not really talked about that much before. So that's part of the reason that I love this type of conversation and this type of interview, is even people that you've known literally since the moment you were born can still surprise you with things that you didn't know about. And I appreciate you, coming on the show. I know that this was not your ideal favorite thing to want to do. You seemed a little hesitant about being on the show, but I think it was a really, really good conversation, and I'm so glad that you did it.
Well, it was a pleasure, my darling, and I love you so much.
Listeners, thank you again for checking out this week's episode of Renoites, and special thanks to my mom for being my guest. Thank you so much, Mom. I really appreciate you doing it. This was super duper fun. As always, please be sure to follow me on social media, subscribe to me on your podcast app of choice, and check us out next week.